There are moments in life when the road runs out. You've prayed, you've planned, you've pushed, and still you're standing at the edge of impossibility. Bills are due, doctors shake their heads, relationships are fractured, doors are closed. And right there, where human ability ends, God steps in, because the God we serve does not need roads to move forward. He makes a way where there is no way. When the sea blocks your progress, He doesn't ask you to swim. He parts the waters. When the walls surround you, He doesn't hand you weapons. He brings them down. When the grave seals the situation, He doesn't accept the verdict. He calls life back into dead places. You see, God is not limited by circumstances. Circumstances are limited by God. But here's the problem. We often want God to explain the way before we trust Him with the step. Yet faith isn't knowing the whole path, it's obeying the next instruction. Sometimes God won't remove the obstacle immediately because the obstacle is the platform for His glory. The delay is not denial. The silence is not absence. The waiting is not wasting. When you can't trace His hand, you must trust His heart. And when God makes a way, it's never just for your relief. It's for His revelation. So that when the breakthrough comes, nobody can say you did this. They'll have to say, only God could have done that. So stand still when He says stand. Move forward when He says move. And remember this truth. If God ordered your steps, He's already arranged your exit. God makes a way. When God brings you to a place where what you face is bigger than what you can handle, it is not an accident and it is not a mistake. It is often a setup. Impossibility is not a problem for God. It is His preferred environment. What overwhelms human strength is the very space where divine power operates most clearly. We tend to panic when resources run out, when options disappear, when answers stop coming. God, however, is not nervous about limits because limits do not apply to Him. What feels like the end to us is often the beginning of God revealing who He really is. Throughout life, we are trained to depend on what we can see, calculate, and control. We measure situations by money, influence, education, experience, and connections. But God is not impressed by human measurements. He is not constrained by what you have or what you lack. When the situation becomes impossible, God removes the illusion that we were ever in control to begin with. He allows the odds to stack against us so that faith, not ability, becomes the determining factor. Impossibility exposes where our trust truly lies. As long as we can fix it ourselves, we rarely invite God fully into the situation. We may pray, but we still lean on our own understanding. Yet when the problem outgrows our strength, prayer becomes less polite and more desperate. Pride begins to fall away. Self-reliance gives way to surrender. And it is in that surrender that God begins to move, because He responds not to human confidence, but to humble dependence. God does not wait for ideal conditions to act. He moves in chaos, shortage, weakness, and uncertainty. He speaks light into darkness and order into confusion. When everything says it cannot be done, God demonstrates that He was never bound by the rules governing the situation. Natural laws may define what humans can do, but they do not define what God can do. He operates above systems, beyond limitations, and outside human expectations. Impossibility also serves a greater purpose. It protects God's glory. When the breakthrough finally comes, there is no confusion about the source. No resume can explain it. No strategy meeting can take credit. No human strength can claim ownership. The situation was too broken, too stuck, too far gone. The only reasonable conclusion is that God stepped in. He allows things to reach that point because He refuses to share His glory with human effort. He wants the testimony to be unmistakable. Many people assume that if God truly loved them, He would prevent impossible situations from occurring. But often, love is precisely why He allows them. Without impossibility, faith remains theoretical. Without pressure, trust stays shallow. God is not just interested in fixing the problem, he is interested in forming the person. He uses impossible situations to stretch faith, mature character, and deepen dependence on him. What he develops in you through the struggle may be more valuable than what he delivers you from. Impossibility also reframes how we see fear. Fear thrives when we believe the outcome depends entirely on us. But when a situation is truly beyond us, fear loses its grip because there is nothing left to pretend we can manage. The responsibility shifts. We stop striving and start trusting. That does not mean we become passive. It means we become obedient. We do what God instructs, even when the instructions seem small compared to the size of the problem. God often waits until we stop asking, "What can I do?" and start asking, "What does God want to do?" That shift changes everything. Instead of viewing impossibility as a threat, we begin to see it as an invitation. An invitation for God to show his power, his faithfulness, and his authority. The problem may not shrink, but our perspective grows. We begin to understand that the same God who brought us this far is not about to abandon us now. So when you stand in front of something that feels immovable, irreversible, or unreachable, remember this: the situation did not catch God off guard. He knew exactly how limited it would be. He knew exactly how outmatched you would feel, and he allowed it anyway. Because impossibility is not where hope dies, it is where God shows up. Faith is often misunderstood as having all the answers, but faith was never meant to eliminate uncertainty. Faith begins where clarity ends. Many people say they trust God, yet what they really mean is that they trust God as long as they can see the full picture. They are comfortable moving forward when the plan is laid out, the timing makes sense, and the outcome looks safe. But God rarely works that way, because if everything were explained in advance, faith would be unnecessary. God usually reveals his will in pieces, not in paragraphs. He gives direction one step at a time because he is more interested in our obedience than our comfort. We want the whole map, but God gives a compass. He does not show the entire journey because he wants a relationship, not a transaction. Faith is not about knowing where the path will end. It is about trusting the one who is leading. This is where many people hesitate. They want confirmation before commitment. They want guarantees before obedience. They ask God to prove himself first, then they will move. But faith works in the opposite order. Obedience comes first, and understanding follows later. God often waits for movement before he releases clarity. The step of faith activates the next instruction, requiring explanation before obedience subtly shifts authority from God to us. It places our understanding above his wisdom, yet God's thoughts are higher and his ways are often beyond human logic. What he asks may not seem efficient, safe, or even reasonable, but faith trusts that God sees what we cannot. When he speaks, he does not owe us a detailed explanation. He asks for trust. Taking a step without full understanding feels risky, and it is. But faith has always involved risk, not reckless risk, but relational trust. It is the willingness to act based on God's character rather than visible evidence. You may not know how the provision will come, but you know the provider. You may not see how the door will open, but you know the one who holds the keys. That confidence is not rooted in outcomes, it is rooted in who God is. Partial obedience is often disguised as wisdom. We delay action by calling it waiting on God, when in reality, God is waiting on us. He has already spoken, but because the instruction does not make sense, we hesitate. Yet delayed obedience is still disobedience. God's power is often released only after we respond to what he has already said. The miracle is connected to the movement. Faith also requires patience because results rarely show up immediately. When you step out, you may not see instant change. The situation may look the same or even worse. This is where many people turn back. They confuse silence with failure. But just because God has not spoken again does not mean he has stopped working. Faith continues to walk even when there is no new instruction. God uses this process to deepen trust. If He explained everything at once, we would rely on information instead of relationship. But when we must depend on Him daily, step by step, our faith matures. We learn to listen more closely, pray more earnestly, and lean more fully on Him. Over time, obedience becomes less about fear and more about confidence in God's faithfulness. When clarity finally comes, it often arrives in hindsight. Looking back, we see how each step was connected, how each act of obedience positioned us for the next move. What felt confusing in the moment becomes clear in reflection. Faith does not eliminate questions, it teaches us to move forward despite them. So faith is not waiting for everything to make sense. It is trusting God enough to move when He speaks, even if the way ahead is still hidden. The step may feel small, but obedience is never insignificant. God honors faith that moves forward without full explanation, because that kind of faith declares that His voice is enough. Obstacles are often interpreted as evidence that something has gone wrong, that a mistake was made, or that the direction taken was incorrect. We assume that resistance means retreat, but many times obstacles are not signs of failure, they are signs of positioning. What stands in the way may actually be standing in place for a purpose greater than our comfort. God does not always remove resistance because resistance can serve His plan in ways ease never could. An obstacle exposes the reality of the situation. It removes shortcuts and forces us to confront our limitations. When everything flows smoothly, it is easy to confuse momentum with meaning. But when progress slows or stops, deeper questions surface. Why am I here? Who am I trusting? What am I really depending on? Obstacles strip away distractions and bring clarity. They narrow the focus so that what truly matters becomes unavoidable. God often uses obstacles to redirect attention from the problem to His presence. When the path is blocked, we look up instead of forward. When resources dry up, prayer deepens. When strength runs out, dependence increases. In this way, obstacles become invitations, opportunities to experience God in a way that would not be possible otherwise. If the way were always clear, faith would remain shallow and God's involvement minimal. Obstacles also reveal what cannot be seen when things are easy: character. Pressure exposes what comfort conceals. When resistance appears, attitudes are tested. Patience, humility, perseverance, and obedience come to the surface. God is not only interested in getting us through the obstacle, He is invested in what the obstacle produces in us. The struggle is not just external. There is internal work happening at the same time, shaping maturity and strengthening faith. What feels like opposition may actually be alignment. God sometimes positions obstacles precisely where they are needed so that the outcome cannot be explained apart from Him. If the breakthrough came easily, the glory would be unclear. But when the obstacle is overwhelming, the resolution becomes unmistakable. God allows resistance to remain long enough to ensure that when it moves, no one doubts who moved it. Obstacles can also serve as divine protection. What we perceive as delay may be God preventing premature movement. There are doors we want open that would harm us if entered too soon. There are paths that look promising but would lead to unnecessary loss. By blocking the way, God guards what we cannot yet see. The obstacle is not punishment, it is preservation. In many cases, obstacles are not meant to be avoided or defeated by force. They are meant to be approached with obedience. God does not always ask for strength. Sometimes He asks for stillness. He does not always demand action. Sometimes He requires trust. Our instinct is to push harder, strategize more, or find another route. God's instruction may be to wait, to worship, or to simply stand firm. The obstacle becomes the place was. Here, obedience is tested and faith is refined. Obstacles also refine perspective. They force us to redefine success. Instead of measuring progress by speed or visibility, we begin to measure it by faithfulness. Are we still trusting? Are we still obeying? Are we still listening? Growth may not be outwardly visible, but inward transformation is taking place. God values who we are becoming as much as where we are going. When the obstacle finally shifts, it often does so suddenly. What stood firm for so long gives way at the right moment. Looking back, we realize the obstacle was never random. It trained us to pray differently, trust deeper, and listen more closely. It prepared us for what lay beyond it. Without the resistance, we might not have been ready for the responsibility on the other side. So obstacles are not merely interruptions to the journey, they are part of the journey. They are tools in God's hands, shaping outcomes and revealing His power. What stands in the way today may be the very thing God uses to display His glory tomorrow. Waiting is one of the most misunderstood experiences in life. When nothing seems to be happening, it is easy to assume that nothing is happening. Silence feels like rejection, delay feels like refusal, and unanswered prayers feel like abandonment. Yet waiting is not an empty space where God is absent. It is often a sacred space where God is actively at work, even when His activity is invisible. We live in a world conditioned to expect speed, immediate responses, instant results, quick fixes. That mindset quietly shapes how we relate to God. We expect Him to move on our timeline, to answer according to our urgency. When He does not, frustration sets in. But God's timing is not driven by convenience. It is guided by wisdom. He sees what we cannot see and works according to what will ultimately bring the greatest good and the cause. Clearest revelation of His purpose. Delay has a way of testing motivation. It reveals whether we desire God for who He is or only for what He can provide. When answers come quickly, gratitude is easy. When waiting stretches on, trust is tested. Yet it is in extended waiting that faith matures. We learn to rely on God's character rather than His immediate actions. We discover that trust is not proven in moments of relief, but in seasons of uncertainty. Waiting also prepares what immediate answers would leave unformed. There are lessons that cannot be rushed, strength that cannot be downloaded instantly. God uses delay to shape patience, humility, and endurance. He aligns our hearts with His will so that when the answer arrives, we are ready to steward it well. Receiving something too soon can be just as damaging as not receiving it at all. In seasons of waiting, God often works behind the scenes. While it appears that nothing is moving, pieces are being arranged. Relationships are shifting. Circumstances are aligning. Hearts, ours, and others are being prepared. Just because we cannot trace His activity does not mean He is inactive. Silence is not absence. It is often an invitation to deeper trust. Waiting also confronts our desire for control. When answers are delayed, we are tempted to take matters into our own hands. We look for alternatives, shortcuts, and substitutes. But premature solutions often create long-term consequences. God's delay is sometimes protection, keeping us from settling for less than what He intends. The wait guards the promise. Faith in waiting is not passive resignation, it is active endurance. It continues to pray even when words feel repetitive. It continues to obey even when results are not visible. It continues to hope even when emotions fluctuate. Waiting faith says, I do not see it yet, but I trust Thee. One who promised. That kind of faith honors God because it rests not in circumstances, but in His faithfulness. Delay also deepens intimacy with God. When there is nothing else to lean on, we lean more fully into Him. Conversations with God become more honest, more vulnerable, more real. Waiting strips away performance and forces authenticity. In the absence of quick answers, relationship grows stronger. We come to know God not just as a provider, but as a sustainer. When the answer finally comes, it often arrives at the right moment, not the early one. Looking back, we recognize that the timing was intentional. What we once thought was a delay was actually alignment. God was ensuring that the answer would not only meet the need, but fulfill the purpose attached to it. The wait did not weaken faith, it refined it. So waiting is not wasted time, it is working time. God is shaping hearts, strengthening faith, and aligning outcomes. What feels like delay is often divine preparation, ensuring that when the answer arrives, it arrives in fullness. Giving God the credit for what he does is more than a spiritual principle. It is a reflection of our understanding of his nature and our dependence on him. So often people are quick to take ownership of breakthroughs, promotions, answers to prayer, or opportunities that come their way. Human pride loves to attribute success to intelligence, effort, or timing. But God's ways are higher, and his interventions are rarely fully visible to human eyes. When he works, the results often surpass what could be accomplished through human effort alone. Acknowledging this truth is essential to maintaining a heart of humility and a life marked by gratitude. Giving God the credit requires recognizing that what seems ordinary to us may be extraordinary in his hands. We may look at a solution, a promotion, a healed relationship, or he orchestrated events, positioned people, and opened doors in ways we cannot trace. What appears to be chance is often divine orchestration. When we claim credit, we obscure the testimony of his faithfulness and diminish the spiritual impact of the story. Credit belongs to God because his power is limitless, while ours is not. Human effort has boundaries. Resources can run dry. Strength can fail. Plans can collapse. Yet God never runs out of power. He is not constrained by natural limitations. When he moves, he brings about results that defy expectation. That is why breakthroughs in life often arrive in ways that cannot be fully explained. When the outcome is miraculous or transformative, it leaves no room for human boasting. Giving God the credit aligns our perspective with reality. Recognizing God's hand also guards against entitlement. When people believe they are the sole architects of their achievements, they develop pride, arrogance, and a sense of self-sufficiency. This mindset can lead to relational tension, spiritual stagnation, and misplaced priorities. Giving God the credit keeps us grounded, reminding us that we are vessels, not the source. It encourages humility and gratitude, and it fosters a heart that is aware of the divine partnership in all things. Giving God the credit also magnifies his glory and inspires faith in others. When others witness a situation being turned around, a need being met, or a miracle occurring, their faith is strengthened when it is clear that God is the source. People are more likely to trust God themselves when they see his power displayed openly and acknowledged honestly. By pointing to God, we invite others into the hope and confidence that come from knowing him. Our testimony becomes a living example of his faithfulness. There is also a spiritual principle at work. God rewards humility and honors hearts that recognize him. When we give him the credit, we are participating in a spiritual exchange where glory is returned to its rightful source. This fosters spiritual growth, increases our sensitivity to his guidance, and opens the door for further blessings. God is not diminished when we acknowledge him. Rather, his presence becomes more evident and his work in our lives becomes more powerful. Giving God the credit requires intentionality. It does not always come naturally, especially when human effort is obvious and struggle has been real. We must train ourselves to pause before claiming ownership, to reflect on the circumstances, the timing, the doors opened, and the unseen interventions. Prayer, reflection, and gratitude help align our perspective. Active so that we see the full picture of God's involvement. This practice transforms ordinary acknowledgement into a lifestyle of honoring God in every aspect of life. Finally, giving God the credit preserves the testimony of his faithfulness for future generations. When our stories are shared and it is clear that God made a way, the next person can draw encouragement, inspiration, and hope. It ensures that the narrative is not about human cleverness, but about divine provision. The impact is eternal because God's glory shines through the lives of those who recognize him as the source of every good outcome. When we embrace this truth consistently, our lives become living testimonies of God's power and faithfulness. Every breakthrough, every answered prayer, every unexpected turn becomes an opportunity to proclaim that it was God who acted. By giving him the credit, we honor his name, deepen our faith, and strengthen the faith of those around us. It transforms success from being simply personal achievement into a platform for divine revelation. Obedience is the bridge between promise and fulfillment, and it is often the most challenging aspect of faith. People want blessings, breakthroughs, and favor, but they struggle with the steps that lead to them. Obedience requires action in alignment with God's instructions, even when the outcome is uncertain. It demands trust when the next step seems small or insignificant compared to the size of the challenge. Yet the smallest act of obedience can position us for the greatest demonstrations of God's power. God's instructions are never arbitrary. They are tailored to the situation and calibrated to reveal his glory when followed. Many times, obedience is counterintuitive. It may require waiting when action seems necessary or speaking when silence feels safer. It may call for generosity when resources are limited or forgiveness. As when pride wants to retaliate, human reasoning often resists these steps because they do not always promise immediate reward or protection. But God's perspective is different. He sees the end from the beginning. What appears inconvenient, risky, or uncomfortable may actually be the very thing that unleashes breakthrough. Obedience becomes the instrument through which divine power flows into circumstances that are otherwise impossible to resolve. Obedience also builds character. It shapes the heart in ways that passive faith cannot. When we obey, even in small matters, we learn discipline, humility, and patience. We discover that trust is not just theoretical, it is practical. It is easy to say we trust God when everything goes our way, but true trust is proven when we act according to his word, despite fear, doubt, or incomplete understanding. Each obedient step strengthens spiritual muscle, preparing us for greater challenges ahead. The process is not always immediate, but it is cumulative. Over time, obedience cultivates a readiness for the moments when God will display his power in ways that cannot be ignored. Obedience is also a testimony to others. When people see lives transformed not by luck or human cleverness, but by consistent alignment with God's principles, faith is reinforced in the community. Obedience communicates that God is active and present, that his ways are effective, and that his instructions are reliable. Witnessing faithful obedience encourages others to trust God as well. The ripple effect of one person's consistent obedience can extend far beyond what is immediately visible. Our actions, aligned with God's will, become a beacon of hope and a tangible demonstration of his character. Another aspect of obedience is the element of timing. Many people struggle because they act too early, too late, or inconsistently. Obedience is not just about action. It is about timing in sync with God's guidance. Acting prematurely can lead to confusion or missed opportunities, while hesitation can allow potential blessings to pass by. Listening closely, discerning carefully, and moving promptly when God directs ensures that obedience yields maximum impact. The faithful heart recognizes the balance between patience and readiness, understanding that God orchestrates both opportunity and action. Obedience requires humility because it acknowledges that God's perspective is superior to ours. It challenges human pride, which insists on control and understanding. We are naturally inclined to rely on our own experience, knowledge, and reasoning, but God calls us to surrender those in favor of his wisdom. Humility allows us to set aside ego, doubt, and self-interest so that we can act solely according to his instructions. In doing so, we demonstrate trust in a way that is not just verbal, but visible through action. The reward of obedience is not always immediate or material. Sometimes it is relational, spiritual, or emotional growth. Sometimes it is preparation for something much larger than what is initially visible. God's blessings often manifest in ways that are unexpected, multifaceted, and perfectly timed. Obedience aligns us with God's plan so that when the moment of breakthrough comes, we are already positioned to receive it. The steps we take in faith, even when unseen or seemingly insignificant, set the stage for outcomes that surpass human expectations. Obedience also cultivates intimacy with God. As we act in alignment with his guidance, our sensitivity to his voice increases. Our hearts become attuned to his direction, and our confidence in his wisdom deepens. Over time, obedience transforms our relationship with God from one of instruction following to one of deep communion. We begin to recognize his fingerprints in the ordinary as well as in the extraordinary, understanding that every instruction, no matter how small, is an opportunity to experience his presence and power. Finally, obedience demonstrates loyalty and love. When we obey, we communicate that God matters more than convenience, fear, or personal preference. It is an expression of faith that acknowledges his authority and his goodness. Through obedience, we invite God's power to intersect with our lives in transformative ways. It is the key that unlocks doors, the channel through which miracles flow, and the evidence of a heart fully aligned with the one who makes a way when there seems to be none.